Here is the edifying story of one of their most typical representatives. To the argument that the new calendar was made by a pope, the ecumenical elder, Paisios, replied, "The new calendar was made by a pope, and the old one by a pagan. Never mind that the Julian calendar was adopted by the Holy Fathers, and church life moved according to it for centuries. Never mind that the evangelical events actually took place according to it. Never mind that the Pope purposefully changed it in order to separate himself from celebrating at the same time as the Orthodox. Never mind that at that time the Orthodox Church anathemosed the papal changes. This does not matter to the heretics. The elder comes into direct contradiction with the words of the equal to the apostles, Holy Tsar Constantine, spoken in connection with the adoption of a unified calendar during the First Ecumenic Council, when the issue of celebrating the resurrection of Christ, which divided the faithful, was resolved. Let the prudence of your holiness reflect on how much it is unpraiseworthy and indecent that on the same days some should fast and others should feast. Wholly equal to the apostles Tsar Constantine, History of the Church, Book 1, Chapters 7, 10, and 11 inches, Blessed Theodoret of Cyrus. Paisios also denies the holy tradition of the Church, which says, "As a zealot for orthodoxy and piety, Justinian took great care of the worship in the Orthodox Church and the splendor of the temples as places of worship. In his code of laws, he included, among other things, a law on the obligatory universal celebration of the feasts of the Nativity of Christ, the baptism of the Lord, and the resurrection, the Annunciation of the Most Holy Theotokos, and others, Lives of the Saints, Life of the Holy Tsar Justinian, Saint Demetrius of Rostov-Ed." This is how the new-style heretic misled people into celebrating with Catholics. "How many churches do you have where you live?" "4, I answered, and a second wave of astonishment hit me. "The old way or the new way?" came the third thunderclap from a clear sky. "2 of the old and 2 of the new," I answered him. "Which one do you go to?" "I in the old one and my wife in the new one." "Look, you also go where your wife goes," he told me categorically, and was preparing to give me explanations. But for me the matter was closed. I did not need explanations and proofs. Then he continued with some explanations, maybe to tell them to others, maybe to use them for myself in times of temptation. And we, of course, here on Mount Athos are according to the old calendar. But this is different. We are in unity with the Church, with all the patriarchates, both with those who are according to the new and with those who are according to the old calendar. We recognize their sacraments and they ours. Their priests perform services with ours. It should be specified that the patriarchies of which the old man speaks were then and now in liturgical communion with Catholics and Protestants, carried out at the Pope's assemblies in Assisi and at the meetings of the WCC. Long before this conversation, the Ecumenal Patriarchy had lifted the anathemat on the unrepentant papists. On December 7, 1965, Patriarch Athenagoras I, together with Paul VI, announced the mutual lifting of the anathemas of 1054, and this act has not been cancelled at the moment. That is, all local churches that are in communion with and recognize the legality of the Constantinople Patriarchy are actually uniate heretic churches. This is how the Lord punishes another pseudo-holy heretic Novositor with long suffering and a painful death. Pain and illness had become almost a natural state for him. From the beginning of his monastic life, he suffered for many years from bronchiectasis, from wrong diagnosis and treatment, from coughing up blood, and at the end, a difficult operation. When they operated on his lungs, he caught a cold and was given strong antibiotics. He developed ulcerative colitis. It seemed to him as if his intestines had peeled off. Since then, his health has become very fragile. At the slightest cold, he had irritations, rumbling of the intestines, and he would pass foam and blood. The same thing happened when consuming certain foods. He was very susceptible to catching a cold. With the first frosts in September, he began to light the brick stove. He had also suffered at Sinai when he tried to lift a heavy granite stone. It hurt him very much. Sometimes he leaned on 2 canes and it was very difficult for him to greet people. In recent years, he had frequent hemorrhages in the intestines, which gradually increased even more. He got to the point of going to the toilet 19 times a night without having to. He was only throwing up blood. The doctors did not know exactly what was causing the bleeding, similar to the torments of Arius, but without reaching the fatal end yet. Repeated warnings to admonish, which never converted the stubborn, deluded, heretical, false Saint Ed. He was exhausted from the bleeding and the great fatigue. He would say, "Sometimes I feel like dying." He could see his strength leaving him. His illness was getting worse. The heavy bleeding did not stop. He began to feel symptoms of fainting. Sometimes he would even faint in the courtyard of his cell, and when he came to himself, he would thank God that no one had seen him. Once this had happened even in the snow. Then he would say, "You would have found me, like a skin in the snow." On the second Sunday of Lent in 1993, during the Holy Liturgy in his church, his exhaustion reached its peak. He began to breathe heavily, his eyes opened wide, and for a while his breathing resembled a deathly snoring. From the great loss of blood, his face had become completely pale. In the meantime, he had developed intestinal obstruction. The intestines became blocked. At the Teogenio Hospital, doctors diagnosed advanced cancer. Following the doctor's instructions, he underwent radiotherapy until the cancer was ready for surgery. He himself had a bigger problem because his bowels had to be emptied 30 times a day in terrible pain. On February 4th, 1994, as of 2014, the operation was performed. The cancer in the colon was removed, but the disease was developing very quickly. It had spread to the liver and lungs. A temporary artificial hindgut was placed. Later, another operation was performed and the function of the intestine was restored. He also accepted and underwent chemotherapy. He felt severe pain during the CT scan. He was in a wheelchair, in pain and shivering from the cold. When it was time to do the examination, the machine broke down and eventually a car came and they took him to another CT scan. The rapid spread of cancer in the liver and lungs was confirmed. At the same time, he was short of breath. He had an oxygen tank that he used when he was having a hard time. The pain was getting worse. One Wednesday, he got ready, thinking that the following Monday he would enter the holy mountain. But suddenly, his condition worsened. Behind these difficulties and obstacles was the will of God. In other words, to be buried outside, in the world, his pain was constantly increasing. The old man lived his last night as a martyr. He lost consciousness for about 2 hours, and when he recovered, he said in a quiet voice, "Martyrdom, true martyrdom," after which he died. It is also appropriate to mention some of the crypto-ecumenical false teachers.